here, and that was very, very inspiring. Um, I want to speak to you first, Carolyn Honecker. You're a third-generation granddaughter of Nazi SS officers. Um, how does it feel? I'll rephrase. How old were you when you found out that your grandparents from both sides were either Wehrmacht or Nazi soldiers during the Holocaust?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. It's a privilege for me and an honor for me and the March of Life, which I'm standing for, that we can be here. I was at the age of 24 when I found out about the history of my family. And I thought my family had nothing to do with the Holocaust at all. It is a huge family. It is a German Christian family. And my forefathers were missionaries in other countries in Africa and Thailand. So I thought for sure they had nothing to do with the Holocaust.
And then how did you come upon, in your 20s, that your family actually has that connection? And what did they do?
I had no relationship with my grandparents, as my parents left home when they were very young, 18 and 19 years old. So I didn't really have any contact with other family members. And in 2013, I got to know the March of Life, which is from Tübingen, an initiative against anti-Semitism. And so we had meetings with Holocaust survivors. And I was wondering what happened in my family during that time. And I approached my grandfather, who was old at that time. And I was asking him, "Grandfather, what did you do during the Second World War? What did our family do?" And he started writing a biography about his life. And he gave it to me and other cousins. And what I read there simply shocked me. I read that my whole family was known as a Nazi family in the town that he was from, which is Ebersbach in Germany. And he wrote that he was in the Wehrmacht fighting in Russia and in Africa, and that his father, my great-grandfather, Gustav Honecker, he was a SS Sturmführer in Ebersbach as well. So he educated other Nazis with the ideology of the Holocaust. And so that was shocking for me.
Your grandmother was also, right, guarding one of the camps?
Yeah, that information hit me in 2017. My aunt came to visit me in Tübingen, and she said, "Carolyn, do you know about your grandmother being involved in the Holocaust as well?" And I said, "No, I had no idea, because I had no contact with her. We didn't really speak about the past." And she said, she was a warden in a concentration camp in Lodz in Poland, Littmannstadt. And she took care of children, of girls. And in the beginning of the war, there were about 20,000 children in that camp. And at the end of the war, about 800 children were left. And she told my aunt stories that the children were starving because the officers took the food. And I heard that story, and I said, I have to do something with this. I have to go to this place. So in 2018, I traveled to Poland, and I came to the memorial and to the former ghetto. And I was kneeling there and crying because of what my grandmother did there, because of the indifference which was in my own heart, not knowing about this story. And it really broke my heart when I was there.
Right. Eve, did you ever imagine that you'd be sitting on a stage at a conference in London with someone whose grandparents were part of those who were trying to destroy the Jewish nation, you and your family?
No, It never occurred to me that I would meet Carol or anyone like her, but I don't think that she has. The only thing she has to do with reference to her grandparents is what she is doing, which is sharing this story. And I'm very moved and touched that you have come out to do this, because many survivors don't tell about their history, but it must be even harder for you. And so I salute you and thank you for being here and for having met you yesterday.
Thank you very much, Eve. This means so much to me, and I think this is the only thing I can do with this family background, to speak about it and take the responsibility and find the words my forefathers never found.
Well,
Thank
you. Nabuki, thank you for being here with us. And you inherited, a very different past from your family. If Carolyn spoke about the past that she wants to fight against, you have a past that it's something that all of us here, acknowledge, and that's why, as Jews and as in Israel, we call it, the righteous of the nations. How did you feel growing up, knowing the courage that your family, that your father, brought upon Holocaust survivors?
It took me quite long time till I found out what my father did during that time. For example, he was stationed in Kaunas in Lithuania as a Japanese consul. And it was just 1 year he was in Kaunas, and at the end of the year, 1940, July, many Jewish people came to the consulate and knocked the door and asked for transit visa. And my father asked the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs if he could or he may issue transit visa. Of course, the answer was negative. He asked 3 times, and meantime, the crowds of Jewish refugees from Poland became bigger and bigger, 200, 300, 400. So he took his decision to issue transit visa. Why transit visa? Because that time Polish people, Jewish people, needed to go out from Kaunas. They came from Poland to Kaunas in Lithuania. And in order to go out, they had to go through Russia, Soviet Union. And there was only one route to go to Moscow and take a Siberian railway to the Japan Sea and land in Japan, and after that to go to any destination they could. So first was exit visa they required from Soviet Union. That time Kaunas was under Soviet Union, so they had to get the permission from Soviet Union. So, they received every day like 100, 200 visa from my father, and they could travel out.
How many visas did he issue?
In the record, there is a list. It's called the Sugihara list. There is 2,300 names. But that time, one passport was including family, so wife and the children. So maybe 2 times. They say so, but we don't see any record of all names, just on the list.
Do you ever think to yourself, always there's an issue of children with parents that are very achievable, that they want to be just like, as good as their parents were and break boundaries. Here, it's a different story. I mean, did you ever feel like, how can I live up to what he has done?
I didn't follow the question.
Did you ever think to yourself, am I going to be as brave as my father was?
You mean if I could do the same as
Yeah.
my father? No, situation was different. I couldn't imagine. Even that later I heard. For a long time I didn't know that he was a diplomat or he issued a visa to rescue people. Only when I was 19 years old, my father took me with him to Embassy of Israel in Tokyo. And there was a commercial attaché, Mr. Nishiri, and he had a visa, copy of visa, and he was a young boy that time, and he said that my father issued this visa. So it was the first time my father saw the visa again. He never told me or told his sons about what happened, what he did. And later, I mean, after 1 month from the visit to the embassy, I received a scholarship to study in Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And I moved to Israel, and I studied and I worked in Israel for many years. That time still, I didn't meet any survivor. Only after 20 years, there was a ceremony to plant trees in Beit Shemesh to commemorate my father. It was by Japanese businessmen, and Keren Kayemet gave a piece of land. And then 20 or 30 survivors' descendants gathered together. And first time I noticed so many were rescued by my father, and I wrote my father, and he noticed that some people were saved, not 2,000. He was happy to hear 20 or 30 people survived. He didn't know.
Thank you very much for this. Eitan, just before you sum it up, just like a very short question to you, Carolyn. Do you feel that the history is returning in Germany or in other places in Europe?
Absolutely. We heard from Dr. Felix Klein that there are about 3,000 incidents last year in Germany, which means anti-Semitism and Jew hatred is still there, which is shocking. And what we have to see is that the same indifference we had 80 years ago is still there. You know, the whole Germany knew about what happened during the Second World War. It is a lie that they knew nothing. This is just not the truth. And people were indifferent when Jews were deported. They were indifferent when murders, rapes, and all that happened. And I think we have the same kind of indifference nowadays still. And this is the greatest battle we have to fight.
Thank you very much for your very emotional and moving words. Eitan, you hear all of this, and I'm wondering, kind of, you're a successful businessman. Why do you need to deal with all this historical, deep, dark history?
Before I answer the question, I'd like to make 2 observations, if I may. The first is that to my right is Eve, first generation. To my left, Caroline, third generation like myself. Nabuki, second generation. And I think it's remarkable that we have this intergenerational panel here today. And of the firm opinion that you do need this intergenerational representation at any table if you're to have an effective voice and an effective outcome. The other observation that I want to make is, I think, something very remarkable, in case we haven't yet appreciated it. And that is, we have here a Holocaust survivor. I'm a descendant of a Holocaust survivor. Caroline, the descendant of German Nazis. And Nabuki, the descendant of righteous amongst the nations. I think it's remarkable that we've all come together here in London, and I want to applaud every one of you for your courage to come together, to have this conversation, and especially you, Caroline, for your very upstanding bravery here today. Thank you. I appreciate it. To answer your question, I am, as many of you already know, very much inspired by my late grandmother's story. Zichrona Levracha, her name was Tamara Zisserman, and at the very young age of 11 years old, her family told her to please stay in bed. She was in Belarus at the time, and that day the Germans killed her entire family, and she was saved by righteous among the nations, people like Nobuki's father. In this case, a very religious Christian family, the Chodosevich family, who hid her in their chimney. She lived amongst the dust, she lived amongst the insects. The Nazis would knock on the door and traumatize her. She would lose her voice, her ability to speak for many months at a time from the trauma. And the terrible tragedy is that the Chodoseviches, while holding their baby, were murdered for their role in the resistance at the very place where my grandmother's family were murdered by the bullets. And so my grandmother went on to survive the war. She landed up in a labor camp, and less known and less documented is that others there also helped her survive and also paid with their life. My grandmother lived a very guilty existence because so many people died for her life. And when I learned that and I started to struggle and appreciate what she was going through, I realized that despite my successes and despite my achievements, I certainly have to take from her learnings, and I have to do my very best to relate
Thank you
to the
very
broader
much.
community.
So thank you, Eitan, Nabuki, Carolyn, and Eve. You inspired us all. And we hope that good things come out of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.